The platform hummed under my boots the moment I stepped onto it, and I already felt it pulling harder than normal gravity should. I stood in a circle of 9 tall, slender aliens. They were Vale nobles, born on a world with much lighter gravity than mine. Next to them, I looked short and heavy, like a rock standing among reeds. 200% standard gravity, the herald announced. His voice bounced off the high crystal ceiling of the throne hall. The trial of weight begins. I glanced up at the royal platform above us. Princess Shavireth sat there, chin resting on one hand, watching me the way someone watches an insect they expect to squash without effort. Ambassador Lin says his species deserves trade rights, she said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. Deserves to stand among us. Her silver eyes moved over me slowly. You'll fall in seconds, human. Let's see how many. I didn't answer. I just planted my feet a little wider and waited. Behind me, I could feel Ambassador Lin's nervous energy like heat coming off a wall. Our entire trade petition, 5 years of talks, promises, and careful words, depended on what happened in the next few minutes. If I fell too fast, Earth would be laughed out of this alliance before it ever began. The gravity began to climb. At 150%, the first Vale noble dropped to one knee. His robes spread out around him like spilled water. Nobody in the crowd laughed. This was expected. Vale bodies were built for a light world, graceful, thin-boned, made for floating steps, not for standing under pressure. At 180%, 3 more nobles sank down, breathing hard, pressing their hands flat against the floor, as if they could push the weight away. I thought about home. I thought about the mining tunnels under Kestrel Ridge, where I worked before I ever became a diplomat. I was young then, wearing a suit heavier than my own body, hauling carts of ore through narrow shafts, where the gravity systems sometimes failed for hours at a time. My father used to say, through the crackle of an old headset, "Your legs don't quit, son, your mind does. Tell your mind to be quiet." I held on to that memory like a rope. At 200%, 5 Vale nobles were down. Shavireth's smile hadn't changed, but something behind her eyes had shifted, just slightly. "Impressive stubbornness," she called out, "for someone so small." I said nothing. Talking took energy, and I needed every bit of mine just to breathe. At 220%, my knees began to shake. I could taste blood. I must have bitten the inside of my cheek without noticing. 2 more nobles folded, one of them crying out softly as he lost his balance and dropped hard onto the polished floor. Only one Vale remained standing beside me now. His name was Threk, the princess's own champion, built stronger than the others, trained for exactly this kind of test. But even he was trembling, his long legs bending slightly at the knees like a tree caught in strong wind. The crowd had gone quiet, not the quiet of boredom, the quiet of people watching something they didn't expect to see. At 240%, Threk finally went down. His legs simply stopped holding him, and he folded onto the floor with a soft, tired sound. Now it was just me. My pulse pounded in my ears so loudly it almost drowned out everything else. My spine felt like it was being pressed together, one bone crushing gently against the next. My vision narrowed at the edges, like I was looking through a tunnel. Somewhere behind me, I couldn't even hear Lin breathing anymore, or maybe I just couldn't hear anything over the roaring inside my own skull. Princess Shavireth stood up from her seat. It was the first time she had moved since the trial began. "Enough," she said, and for the first time, there was no mockery in her voice. Just something quieter, something that sounded almost like she didn't know what she was looking at anymore. "The trial is decided." "Not yet," I said. My voice came out flat and strained, crushed by the weight pressing on my chest. But the small translator device on my collar caught it and carried it across the hall anyway. "Raise it," I said. "One more level." A soft murmur passed through the crowd, like wind moving through dry grass. Shavireth's eyes narrowed, but not with anger this time. It looked more like disbelief. "You've already won, human. There's no one left standing against you." I forced myself to lift my head and look at her, even though my neck felt like it was made of wet rope. "I'm not standing against them," I said slowly. "I'm standing against everything you said about my people before I even walked into this room." The hall fell completely silent. She stared at me for what felt like a very long time. 3 seconds. Maybe 5. Then, slowly, she raised one hand. 260, she said. The platform hummed higher, and the weight dropped onto me like the ceiling itself had come down an inch. My nose began to bleed, warm and sudden, dripping onto the floor between my boots. My vision shrank down to one single point of light, her silver eyes, watching me from across the hall. I did not kneel. I thought about every person back home who had ever stood their ground when it would have been easier to give up. Miners, who kept walking through failing tunnels. Nurses who stayed on their feet through long, difficult nights. Firefighters who didn't step back from a burning building even when their arms were shaking. People who stood, not because it was easy, but because someone needed them to. My legs don't quit, I told myself. My mind does. So I told my mind to be quiet. 10 seconds passed. Then 15. The blood ran freely now, and somewhere far away, I heard Ambassador Lin say my name under his breath, almost like a prayer. Enough! Shavareth's voice cracked across the hall, sharp and sudden. This time it wasn't a command for the platform. It was a command for herself, as if she needed to say it out loud to believe it. The gravity dropped fast, and I staggered forward, catching myself before I could fall, held up by nothing but the same stubbornness that had kept me standing this whole time. The princess stepped down from her high seat. Her long robes made a soft chime as she walked, and the entire hall watched her cross the floor toward me in complete silence. She stopped close enough that I could see her hands were trembling slightly, maybe from the tension of the moment, maybe from something else entirely. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Would you ask for more?" I had already given up the trial. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my glove, breathing hard. "Because you had already given up," I said. "But the next human who walks into this hall shouldn't have to prove all of this over again. I wanted to finish it properly, so nobody else has to start from zero." She looked at me for a long moment, studying my face like she was trying to understand something new. Then she turned to face her court, and when she spoke again, every trace of mockery was gone from her voice. "Let it be written down," she said, loud and clear for the whole hall to hear. "The humans do not fall easily. They choose the moment they stop standing." Behind me, I finally heard Ambassador Lin let out a long breath he must have been holding the entire time. By the time the sun set over the Vale capital that day, our trade petition had been approved. 5 years of careful talks, finished in a single afternoon, all because of a few minutes standing on a platform that tried its best to put me on the ground. But strangely, it wasn't the treaty I remembered most clearly, not even years later. It was the look on Shavareth's face when she realized she had been wrong about us. Not with anger, but with quiet respect. After the ceremony, she found me again near the entrance of the hall, where healers were still wrapping a cool cloth around my nose to stop the last of the bleeding. She waited patiently until they finished, then spoke to me alone, away from the crowd. "Where I come from," she said, "strength is judged by how light you are, how easily you move. We built our whole culture around grace, around never appearing to struggle." She paused, glancing toward the now empty platform. "I have never seen anyone struggle so plainly, and still refuse to stop. On my world," I said, "we don't get to choose our gravity. It's just always there, pressing down, whether we like it or not. So we learn early that struggling isn't shameful, it's just part of standing up in the first place." She considered this for a moment, then gave a small nod, the kind of nod that seemed to carry real understanding rather than polite agreement. "Perhaps," she said, "we have misunderstood your people for a long time." "Maybe," I said, "but you didn't have to change your mind today. Not everyone would have." For the first time since I'd met her, she smiled without any trace of mockery in it. "A ruler who cannot admit when she is wrong is not fit to rule for long," she said simply. "I intend to rule for a very long time." I laughed at that, even though it made my ribs ache. She seemed pleased by the sound. Before I left the palace that evening, she walked with me and Ambassador Lin to the outer gates, something I later learned she almost never did for visiting guests. As we stood beneath the tall crystal archway, she turned to me one last time. "Tell your people," she said, "that the doors of the Vale Dominion are open to them, not because they are strong in the way we expected, but because they are strong in a way we did not know existed." I promised her I would. Years later, long after I had left the diplomatic service and returned to a quieter life, I would sometimes tell this story to my own children, late in the evening when they couldn't sleep. I told them about the tall, graceful aliens who had never known true heavy gravity, and about a princess who learned, in front of her entire court, that judging people before truly seeing them was a mistake worth admitting. But mostly, I told them what my father once told me, the words that carried me through that entire trial, without my ever forgetting them. Your legs don't quit, your mind does. So whenever life pressed down harder than expected, whenever the weight of a hard day felt like it might finally win, I always remembered that platform, that silent hall, and the simple truth I proved that day, one that I believe is true for all of us, wherever we come from. We don't fall because we are weak. We fall only when we decide the moment has come to rest. And sometimes, if it matters enough, we decide not yet.